Millionaire sees a girl in a wheelchair selling candy at a red light and freezes. When he recognizes the necklace around her neck, she stretched out her hand with difficulty, trying to balance the little box of candies while the light was still red. Rain ran down the torn hood that barely covered her fine hair, stuck to her forehead. The wheels of her makeshift wheelchair sank into muddy puddles, and the black plastic covering the seat was already torn at the edges, letting the cold slip in like a silent blade. But she didn't cry. She just held out her hand, as if that was all she'd ever known. Inside the bulletproof SUV, the millionaire sighed as he saw the girl approaching the window. He was late for a crucial meeting. He pulled out his phone, pretended to make a call. He just wanted the light to turn green. He avoided eye contact, he always did, until he saw the necklace, a thin, worn silver chain. The pendant, a small heart intertwined with a star. Identical. Not similar. Identical to the one he had placed around his daughter's neck in the hospital nursery, just minutes before she vanished without a trace. He felt his blood run cold. He lowered the window, hesitant. The sound of the rain grew louder, and the girl flinched. He stared at the necklace, then at her eyes so familiar, the same shade of brown he saw every morning in the mirror, and a barely noticeable tremble in her chin, just like her mother's, when she tried to be strong. But there was something he didn't know yet. She simply said, "Would you like to buy a candy, sir?" Her voice was soft but steady, and something inside him broke, because it wasn't just hunger, it wasn't just need, it was the routine of someone who had learned not to expect anything from the world. He didn't answer. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and crouched down beside the wheelchair. He smelled wet clothes, heard the metallic creak of the wheels. He touched the necklace with trembling fingers. "Where did you get this?" he asked, unable to hide the panic in his voice. The girl took a step back, or tried to. The wheelchair caught on a rock. She lost her balance, nearly fell. He caught her just in time. And then she replied, "I've always had it. The woman who raised me said it was from my mother. And who was this woman? I don't know. She died when I was 6. Left me with her husband. He didn't like me, said I was expensive. That I should sell something." The millionaire swallowed hard. The light turned green. Cars behind him started honking. But he didn't move. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl hesitated, then said, "Clara." He closed his eyes. That was the name they had chosen. The name they never got to register, because the birth certificate went missing the same day she was discharged. The name he and his wife had whispered to her in the crib, before the panic, before the police, before the emotional wreckage that led to divorce, loneliness, silence. But then she said something else. "Mister, can I go? If I don't sell everything, he hits me." He shot to his feet. "Who? Who hits you?" She just looked down. The cars kept honking. The rain grew heavier, and the world felt too small to hold everything he was feeling. But this was no time to back down, or to doubt. And the man who had raised her appeared at the corner. He looked straight at the SUV and started walking toward them. The name Clara had never stopped echoing, not even as time quietly stacked the years. Not even when the newspapers stopped covering the search for the baby kidnapped from the city's most secure hospital. Not even when the once indestructible marriage dissolved like smoke in a quiet, empty room. His name was Nathaniel Hayes, and for 20 years, no one had dared speak that name in front of him. The daughter who vanished, the daughter he had sworn to protect and lost before he could even hear her cry at home. Every attempt to move on, therapy, retreats, top psychiatrists, had failed in the face of an absence that burned like exposed flesh in cold air. He was the man who had it all. Or so people said. Tech investments, 5 public companies, twice on the cover of Forbes. But he slept alone, ate in silence, and lived in houses so big his footsteps echoed like ghosts. He hadn't truly smiled since that day. Not once. The hospital called it a security system failure. The police said it was a fast operation, no witnesses, maybe even a planned crime. But Nathaniel never accepted that. For 2 years he chased false leads, visited morgues, listened to psychics, wandered dirty alleys and abandoned houses, until his wife, hollowed out inside, begged him to stop. "Or we'll lose each other too," she said, her eyes as empty as the crib still standing in the nursery. But there was something he didn't know yet. On that rain-soaked corner, 20 years later, time collapsed all at once. The name Clara, spoken by a girl in a patched-up wheelchair, reopened wounds he thought buried under emotional concrete. But they were there, alive, beating. The man now approaching wasn't a stranger. He was known to the police. Gerald Moore, ex-mechanic, a history of abuse, multiple child mistreatment reports. One of the names Nathaniel had investigated years ago but had never connected to Clara. And now he was walking with rage, dragging a worn coat and locking eyes on the girl. Nathaniel stepped in front of her. "She with you?" Gerald asked, voice slurred with alcohol and fury. Nathaniel didn't respond. He just stood there, blocking the way with his body. Gerald smirked. "None of your business, rich boy. She owes me. She sells till she pays. Now move." But then Clara grabbed Nathaniel's arm. "Don't let him take me, please. He... She didn't need to finish. The marks on her arms said enough. The fatherly instinct, buried under years of pain and silence, rose with brutal force. Nathaniel grabbed his phone, already dialing 911. Gerald backed off but didn't leave. "You don't know who you're messing with, Hayes. That girl's legally my responsibility." "Not for long," Nathaniel said, voice low and steady. The rain was now just background noise. The honking had faded. Only 3 people existed in that moment: the girl, the millionaire, and the man who may have stolen their years. But there was more. Because when the police arrived, Clara said something that changed everything. She pointed at Nathaniel and asked, "Are you the man from the photo?" He froze. "What photo?" "The one that was hidden, in an envelope, with this necklace." And from under her shirt, she pulled a folded, dirty, almost disintegrating piece of paper. Nathaniel unfolded it. It was him, 20 years younger, with his wife, holding a baby. Clara was that baby. The police station felt far too cold for a reunion. The place smelled of stale coffee and damp walls, and the fluorescent lights were unforgiving. Clara's flimsy wheelchair, her scraped knees, Nathaniel's tense face. He tried to stay calm, but the knots in his stomach only grew. She was there, but not his. Maybe never would be. A social worker walked in with mechanical steps, clipboard in hand, wearing the expression of someone trained not to believe. "Mr. Hayes, we understand the emotional nature of your situation, but there is no document proving this girl is your daughter. No tests have been done. There is no record of adoption or any legal connection to Mr. Gerald Moore to confirm custody. At this time, Clara is under the care of the state." The word custody hurt more than it should have. Nathaniel took a deep breath. "She was wearing the necklace we gave our daughter in the nursery. She had a photo of us. She knew my name. She knew the name we gave her. That's not a coincidence. Coincidence." The social worker didn't even blink. "We've seen similar cases. Street kids hear stories, repeat them. Sometimes they're coached by adults. We have to follow protocol. A DNA test has been ordered. Results take 5 to 7 business days." But there was something he didn't know yet. While Nathaniel wrestled with the cold indifference of the system, Clara sat in a separate room, staring at white walls, trying to make sense of everything. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't wet or hungry or in immediate danger. But the feeling of safety was foreign, like she no longer belonged anywhere. Not there. Not with him. Just in some kind of limbo where time moved slower, and anything could fall apart at any moment. "He said he's my dad," she whispered to the police officer, who had offered her a blanket. "But I don't remember him. Just the smell of the photo paper, and the way the woman looked at me when she hid the necklace under my shirt, like it was forbidden to remember." The officer just nodded. There wasn't much she could say on eye. The other side of the wall, Nathaniel was on the phone with lawyers, experts, trusted friends. He wanted every second of those 7 days cut in half. But the system was slow and cold. and blind. Then came the first call from his ex-wife in years. "Is it true?" she asked without introduction. Her voice was the same, but the pauses between words were heavier. "I think so, Rose. She has the necklace and the photo and the name and the eyes." There was a long pause. "The eyes." After that, just her breathing on the line. "Ah, you going to take her?" she finally asked. "If the test confirms it, then of course I will." "And if it doesn't?" Nathaniel didn't answer. And in that moment, everything fell apart. The social worker returned to the room, his expression even more severe. "We've received a legal challenge. Mr. Moore has claimed Clara as his adopted daughter and presented a document signed by a judge from a rural county. It's old, but appears to be legitimate. We'll have to keep her in state custody until everything is clarified." Nathaniel shot up from his chair. "That man abused her. She told you herself. You saw the marks. We understand the seriousness of the accusation, but until a judge reviews the documentation, we cannot allow direct contact between you and the minor." The word minor cut him like a blade. Smaller than the time he'd lost, smaller than the love he never got the chance to give, smaller than the 20 years of absence he would never recover. He left the room and saw Clara being led down a hallway. She saw him, smiled. A small, sad smile, but real. And then she said, "You're coming back, right?" He held back his tears. "I'll be back, Clara, I swear on everything." But he didn't know someone was listening. Across the street, Gerald Moore watched from a distance. He spoke into a phone. "He found her. We're going to have to speed things up. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that like button." Nathaniel spent the following days like a man at war. But this was a war against invisible walls, calls, emails, meetings with lawyers, prosecutors, old political connections. Always the same response. "We're doing what we can, but the process takes time." And time was exactly what he didn't have. Each night without Clara was torture. He dreamed of her saying his name, smiling, asking him to come back. But he always woke up alone, surrounded by silence and guilt. The makeshift wheelchair was still in his trunk, wet, rusted, untouched. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. It felt like a monument to the abandonment she'd endured, and to the father who hadn't been there. Meanwhile, Clara was living in a state shelter with other minors at risk. The place was clean, functional, but it wasn't home. The walls were too white, the meals too standardized, the adults too cold and overwhelmed. She spent her days wondering whether the man with the necklace was real or just another mirage in the emotional desert she'd grown up in. There were other girls there, some younger, others harder, all with stories that hurt to look at, even when they weren't spoken out loud. At night, Clara stared out the dorm window, trying to remember the smell of Nathaniel's clothes, the sound of his voice when he said, "I'll be back." That felt safer than any wall, but there was something she didn't know yet. Gerald hadn't disappeared. He was moving, using old contacts, exploiting legal loopholes. The document he presented was real, but obtained under questionable circumstances. A judge bribed in a forgotten county, and now he wanted Clara back, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear she might talk, fear it could all come to light. Meanwhile, Nathaniel received an unexpected visit. Rose, his ex-wife, showed up at his home after years of silence. Her eyes carried the weight of a woman who had loved until it broke her, and then had to learn to live with the emptiness. "I want to see her," she said bluntly. Nathaniel nodded. "They won't let us. Not until the test comes back." She walked through the house, eyeing the old photos still on the shelves. She stopped in front of Clara's old room. He had never taken it down. It was still there, intact, like a silent scream waiting to be heard. "Do you really believe it's her?" she asked softly. "No, I know it is." Rose sat in the armchair by the window, looked out as if searching for meaning in the grey sky. "What if it's not? You'll break again." "I've been broken for years, Rose." She didn't answer. Just cried, for the first time in a long time, and it wasn't loud, it was more like a whisper, as if the tears had no strength but had to come out anyway. Then, Nathaniel's phone rang. It was his attorney. "The judge has scheduled the custody." hearing, but there's a complication. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Tell me. Gerald hired an aggressive lawyer. They're planning to accuse you of emotional manipulation, attempted abduction, and they're going to use your wealth against you. Say you're trying to buy her, but I'm not trying to buy her. I want her alive, safe, happy. I know, but the court doesn't always hear what matters. Nathaniel hung up and looked at Rose. Will you come with me? She hesitated, then said, She was my daughter, too. On the morning of the hearing, Nathaniel wore the same suit he'd worn to his mother's funeral, not out of superstition, but because he wanted to remember that real love survives death. And Clara was real love, even with 20 years in between. When he arrived at the courthouse, he saw Gerald entering with his lawyer beside him, smiling, as if confident of winning, as if Clara were a possession to be claimed, not a wounded, life needing care. Nathaniel clenched his fists, but he wasn't alone. Rose arrived soon after, holding hands with a social worker, and behind them, someone unexpected, a doctor. What's he doing here? Nathaniel asked. The social worker replied, He was a medical intern at the hospital where Clara was born, and he has something to tell us. The courtroom was far too crowded for a case that seemed small on paper, a minor caught between a millionaire and a rural man, but all it took was one look at Clara, sitting in a government-issued wheelchair, eyes far older than her years, to realize nothing about this was simple. The judge, a man with a slow voice and impatient eyes, opened the session with formalities. Nathaniel barely heard the legal terms. He only saw Clara, and she was looking back at him, but something in her gaze had changed. A hesitation, a distance, as if she were trying to protect what little of herself was left. Gerald was the first to speak, coached by his lawyer. This child was left with me by a homeless woman. I raised her as best I could. I never hurt her. She's had mobility issues since she was little. She needs me. Nathaniel clenched his jaw. Gerald's lawyer held up the adoption document, signed by a county judge. It was old, yellowed, but official. Nathaniel stood, heart pounding. With all due respect, Your Honor, that document was signed by a judge who is currently under investigation for corruption. And, more importantly, Clara showed me a photo hidden alongside the necklace we gave our daughter the day she was born. She knew our names, her name, the name we gave her before she disappeared. That is circumstantial, Mr. Hayes. The judge replied. This court deals in formal evidence, but there was something the judge didn't know yet. The social worker stood and requested permission to introduce new testimony. The young doctor, who had been a medical intern at the time of Clara's birth, was called to the front. Your Honor, I was working in the neonatal unit when the Hayes' daughter was born. I remember the case because I was the last person to see the baby before she disappeared. I saw a hospital employee take the child for a so-called test. She never returned. That employee was fired days later, but never fully investigated. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge leaned back, visibly unsettled. And why was this not included in the original inquiry? The judge asked. Because no one ever asked me. I was just an intern. I tried to speak up. No one listened. The judge scribbled something down but kept a cautious expression. Then Clara was called. She approached slowly, pushed by a volunteer. She stopped in front of the microphone and looked at the judge, then at Nathaniel, and finally at Gerald. I don't remember much, just the necklace, and the photo, and how the woman who raised me said I came from another place, that I was special, but I couldn't tell anyone. She was afraid of him. She pointed at Gerald. The room held its breath. He used to hit me, called me deadweight, said I should be grateful he took me in. But I just wanted to go to school. I just wanted to walk without pain. I just wanted to know where I came from. Do you believe Mr. Hayes is your father? The judge asked. Clara hesitated, and in that moment, everything paused. I don't know, but I want him to be. Because when he held me that day, it was the first time I felt like someone actually saw me. Nathaniel blinked back tears. Rose cried quietly, but then Gerald's attorney struck a blow. Your Honor, despite the emotion of the moment, we're talking about a minor being subjected to emotional manipulation. We request Mr. Hayes be barred from contact until the DNA results arrive. We're also filing for a restraining order due to potential attempted abduction. The word abduction exploded in the room like a thunderclap. Nathaniel stood. That's outrageous. Silence, Mr. Hayes, the judge barked, but the damage was done. The hearing was suspended until the DNA test results arrived. Clara was taken back to the shelter. She didn't look back. Nathaniel walked out of the courthouse, shoulders hunched, heart shattered. Outside on the sidewalk, Rose caught up to him. She's confused, Nate. And for good reason. What are you going to do? He looked up at the grey sky. Wait, and pray she doesn't forget me before the truth comes. But on the other side of the city, someone was speeding that time up. And it wasn't the justice system. It was Gerald. And he had a plan. Nathaniel lost Clara for the second time on a grey afternoon. The phone rang at 2:17 p.m. It was the director of the shelter. Her voice was cold, calculated, devoid of genuine emotion. Mr. Hayes, I regret to inform you that Clara went missing from the shelter this morning. We believe she was taken by someone from outside. Surveillance footage shows a man wearing a cap and mask wheeling her chair out through the service exit. The police have been notified. It was as if the entire world froze. Nathaniel didn't respond, didn't even breathe. Just stood there, phone pressed to his ear, heart pounding in his stomach. Rose, still in the kitchen, understood instantly from the silence. She ran to him. What happened? He dropped the phone to the floor. She's gone again. But there was something he didn't know yet. The police treated it like routine, standard protocol. A report filed, a sweep of the area, a search of public cameras. Nothing. No new leads, no answers, just empty questions. Nathaniel went back to the courthouse. He begged the judge to intervene, but he was told that without completed DNA results, he had no legal authority over Clara. She's my daughter, he shouted. The judge only looked down. Nathaniel felt like he did 20 years ago, powerless, alone, voiceless in a system that swallows stories like his every single day. This time there were no clues, no promises, just brutal absence. He spent the next hours reviewing surveillance footage, calling old contacts, hiring private investigators. All of them said the same thing. Gerald's gone too. Deep down, Nathaniel knew. It was him. Again. But this time, there might not be a second chance. That night, Nathaniel didn't sleep. He sat in Clara's old room, still untouched. He turned on the nightlight he had built by hand before she was born. It still worked. The light flickered, dim but alive. There, he cried, not the loud kind, but the broken sobs of a man who gave everything and lost. Again. And this time it hurt even more, because this time he had held her, looked into her eyes, heard her voice, smelled her hair, and that made it worse. The next day the police knocked on his door. We received an anonymous tip. A rural property in Redfield County. It used to belong to a distant relative of Gerald Moore. We're heading out, would you like to come? Nathaniel didn't speak. He grabbed his coat and got in the car. The farm was old, abandoned, buried, behind miles of dirt roads. When they arrived, officers surrounded the place. Nathaniel stayed in the car, sweating, shaking. Then he heard the radio chatter. We found a wheelchair in the shed, and blood. Time stopped. Nathaniel leapt from the car. An officer held him back. He screamed, fought, fell to his knees in the mud. Where is she? He shouted. Where's my daughter? But no one answered. There was no sign of Clara or Gerald, just the destroyed wheelchair drag marks and a gut-wrenching sense that history was repeating itself. But this time with a worse ending. That night back home, Nathaniel didn't turn on a single light. He sat on the floor of the living room, staring into nothing. Rose tried to reach him. Nate, you need to eat, sleep, breathe. She's dead, Rose. I feel it, I know. I saw the blood. She knelt beside him. You also saw her eyes and what she said. She wants to be your daughter. And if there's even a thread of a chance, you have to hold on to it. But he didn't reply. That was the first time he truly thought about giving up. Then the phone rang. It was a blocked number. Nathaniel answered in silence. On the other end, a weak voice, slow but familiar. Dad, help me. And the line went dead. Her voice lingered in Nathaniel's mind like a whisper from the bottom of a dark well. Dad, help me. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't desperation. It was truth, like she knew he was all she had left, like he was the last safe harbor in a sea that kept sinking. The next morning, Nathaniel was up before sunrise. No sleep, no hunger, no choice. Something had lit up inside him. Not rage, not despair, but focus. The resolve of a man who wasn't going to lose again. And this time he wasn't alone. Rose appeared at the door holding 2 coffees and an envelope. This came today. No return address. Turn address. It was a photo. Clara tied to a wooden chair in a room with rotting wooden walls. In the background, a window covered in leaves and an analog clock. 2:12 p.m., the exact time of the call the day before. Nathaniel grabbed a magnifying glass, focused on the detail. That clock, it's from a model used in rural public schools back in the 80s, and that wall looks like it belongs to an old barn. He called the private investigator he'd hired. Within an hour they were reviewing all rural properties in the neighboring county, but something else stood out, a clue Clara had left herself. In the corner of the photo, scratched in what looked like charcoal, a shaky letter and number M7. Rose pointed at it. Could be a building number, or a room, or a code, or a plea. M as in me, 7 for days, or maybe Route M7. There's one on the map near Redfield, the investigator confirmed. There's a state road M7 barely used, cuts through old farmlands. One of the properties there was recently sold for cash. No digital record. Nathaniel didn't wait for permission. He grabbed the car keys. Rose and the detective were already in the passenger seats. They drove for hours until GPS lost signal. But Nathaniel's instinct was stronger than any satellite. They arrived at an old structure, hidden between dry cornfields and twisted trees. The car was left more than 100 yards away. They approached on foot. Total silence. No signs of life, just the creak of wind through leaves and the scent of wet wood. But there was something they didn't know yet. Inside the barn, Clara was awake, weak but alive. Gerald had left hours ago, chaining the door and making hollow promises that everything would be fine soon. She heard rats, water dripping from a leaky roof, and she thought about Nathaniel. She believed he'd come, because despite everything, he was the only one who ever looked at her like a daughter. Not a burden, not a transaction. Someone who deserved to exist. Outside, Nathaniel and the detective circled the barn. Rose stayed in the car watching the road. Then Nathaniel saw it, the same window from the photo. The same clock, now frozen at 2:12. It was enough. He picked up a rock, shattered the glass and forced the lock. Entered the dark. "Clara," he whispered, a sound. Faint. "Dad?" He rushed toward the voice, found her tied up but conscious. Their eyes filled with tears, both of them. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. He embraced her before even untying the ropes. "You are my daughter. I will never stop looking for you." But then, footsteps. Gerald was back. Nathaniel stepped in front of Clara. The detective appeared from the side, gun drawn. "It's over, Moore." But Gerald only smiled. "You think it works like that? You take her and vanish? That's it?" Nathaniel stepped closer. "She's not yours. She never was." "And you think she's yours? After 20 years? Because of an old necklace and a crumpled photo? Because I'm the only one who heard her say, 'Help me.' That already makes me more of a father than you ever were." Police arrived minutes later. Rose had called them. Gerald was taken away in handcuffs, still shouting threats no one was listening to anymore. Clara was placed into an ambulance. Nathaniel held her hand the entire time. Before they closed the doors, she looked up at him and asked, "Will you still want me? If the test says I'm not your daughter?" He bent down, gently touched her face. "You already are. From the moment you looked at me and I saw my whole life in your eyes." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and second chances. Clara's room had wide windows, flowers on the sill, and a TV in the corner she never turned on. She preferred the sky. It felt new, like she was finally allowed to breathe. Nathaniel was there every day. He came early with books, bad jokes, fruits she claimed to hate but always ate. Rose showed up in the afternoons, bringing colorful blankets, calm words, and a mother's patience honed by years of waiting too long. Clara's left leg was in a cast, her right arm still weak. But what changed most was her eyes. Every day, less guarded, less fear, more hope. And in small gestures, she began to believe she belonged. But there was something she still didn't know. Nathaniel avoided the subject of the DNA test. The medical team said the results would come any moment. He just wanted to enjoy the now, the presence, the chance. But deep down, he knew Clara needed the truth. Because truth would either bring peace or destroy what they were building. One morning, she asked, "Did the results come in?" He didn't lie. He just looked away. "Yes." "And?" Nathaniel took a deep breath. "You have the same blood type as me. Same genetic markers. Clara, you are my daughter." She didn't say anything. She just cried. For the girl who never knew where she came from, for the woman who lied, for the man who hurt her, but most of all, for herself, for the Clara who survived, who endured. Nathaniel held her gently, and in that embrace, the 20 years of silence began to rearrange themselves into something whole. But there was still a lot to rebuild. Clara needed physical therapy, trauma care, protection, and above all, time. Nathaniel knew that. He assembled a team of specialists, brought her home, remodeled the bedroom, but kept the old things, memories, photos, the childhood lamp. Rose moved in temporarily. It was strange at first, sharing space with someone who had once been everything and then nothing, but slowly they began finding each other again, in the way they cared for Clara, in the easy silences, in the quiet glances that whispered, "Thank you." Clara, even on crutches and medication, began to bloom. She wrote letters to herself, drew pictures, spent whole afternoons listening to old songs and asking questions like, "Did you two used to dance together? Did you fight about me a lot?" The answers always came with a smile and a lump in the throat. But then, she asked the hardest question. "What if I never learned to walk?" Nathaniel sat beside her, took her hand. "You already run faster than anyone I've ever met. But what if I fall again? I'll catch you. Every time." That was the day she asked to see the ocean. "I've never been, only in pictures, but I dream about it always." 2 weeks later, they were at an empty beach. Nathaniel pushed her chair through the sand. Rose snapped photos with an old camera. Clara laughed, loud, like someone who finally chooses to live, even knowing it might hurt. Sitting by the waves, she closed her eyes and said, "For a long time I thought my place in the world was that dark barn. The rain, the broken chair, but it wasn't. My place is here with you." Nathaniel couldn't hold back the tears. Neither could Rose. But something was still waiting for them. In the back seat on the drive home, Clara found an envelope. "No, our return address, inside just one handwritten sentence. She was never only yours, and I'm not finished." It was Gerald's handwriting. The past still had claws. The silence in the car was heavier than any storm. The note burned in Nathaniel's hands like it was made of gunpowder. He knew Gerald wouldn't disappear without a trace. His obsession with control wouldn't die in a cell. But what he didn't know was how far Gerald was still willing to. For that night, Clara slept in the room next door, exhausted from therapy and counseling. Rose stayed up, sitting on the couch, a cold cup of tea in her hands, watching Nathaniel pace like a caged animal. "Do you think he's coming back?" she asked. Nathaniel stopped. "He's already back. He just hasn't shown his face yet. We have security, cameras. Gerald doesn't need force. He knows how to break people. He waits for the perfect moment, he always has. But there was something they didn't know yet." In the middle of the night, the house alarm went off. Nathaniel bolted down the stairs. Security cameras showed a shadow in the backyard, quick movements. Then, silence. Police were called. They searched everything. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. But the next morning, Clara found something resting on her wheelchair. A button. From an old blouse she recognized instantly. It had belonged to the woman who raised her. The woman Gerald claimed to have rescued. Clara didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply handed the button to her father and said he was here. He wants to remind me, wants me to go back to who I was. Nathaniel held the button like it was a weapon, and in that moment, he made the decision he'd been holding back for months. That's enough. With the detectives' help, they tracked down Gerald's known associates. One, an old shop partner, finally talked. Gerald kept a secret hideout, an abandoned building on the east side of the city, a place he used to keep things the world wasn't meant to see. Nathaniel went there, alone. It was a concrete basement, dirty walls, the smell of oil and dust. In the center, a table on it, dozens of photos of Clara, newspaper clippings about the old kidnapping, notes, obsessions, and beside them, a cassette tape. He hit play. Gerald's voice filled the room. She was never yours, Hayes. You lost the right the moment you left her in that hospital. I did what no one else did. I raised her my way. She was mine and she will be again. Nathaniel could barely breathe. But what came next was worse. The voice changed. Now it was the woman who raised Clara. A confession recorded before she died. He told me I had to take the girl, said she was worth a lot, that the hospital would help. I didn't know she had parents. I didn't know what would happen after. I only agreed because he promised things would be different. But he lied. Nathaniel fell to his knees. The past, finally exposed. Clara had been stolen, sold, used. And he had failed to find her before the pain took root. Then he heard a sound behind him. Gerald, no mask, no hat, just him. Aged, broken, sick eyes. You came. I knew you would. Nathaniel stood slowly. You lost. She still hears me. She has a family now. Family? That's not family. You carry guilt. Your wife does too. And she'll never stop carrying what I gave her. Nathaniel stepped forward, stopped inches away. She won't carry any of it. Her pain ends here, and you disappear. Gerald pulled something from his pocket. A small, worn knife. Nathaniel didn't move. Going to kill me? In front of the girl. You tortured? Gerald hesitated, and that was enough. The police, alerted by the detective who had followed Nathaniel, burst in. Gerald was subdued. The knife clattered to the ground. This time, there would be no escape, no bribes, no corrupt judges. Hours later, Nathaniel returned home. Clara was awake, listening to music with Rose. He knelt beside her and handed her the button. He's not going to find you again. She smiled, but didn't speak. She just hugged him. And in that embrace, all the pain became strength. But there was still one thing time needed to give them, forgiveness, and it would come. In one final gesture, the sun rose slowly that morning, filtered through the white linen curtains Rose insisted on keeping open since Clara came home. It was like the light itself was needed to remind them that darkness hadn't won. That day, the air felt different, lighter, whole. Clara could walk now, with help, small steps, dragging her leg in its new brace, hands firm on her crutches. Every step was a victory. Every breath, proof that the body, though broken, still answered the call to live. Nathaniel watched from the kitchen, coffee in hand, heart tight. Every time she moved, the floor shook beneath him, not with fear, but with gratitude. The girl from the lighthouse, from the broken chair, from the forgotten necklace, now walked to the porch to admire the garden Rose had planted. It's going to be a pretty day, Dad. The sky's clear. Nathaniel smiled. He still wasn't used to hearing her say Dad. But every time she did, it stitched together another piece of what had been torn for 20 years. In the living room, Rose was putting together a photo album. Old and new pictures. Clara helped, laughing at the past, trying to spot herself in her parents' faces. It was a quiet ritual, a restoration of identity. But Clara still held on to something. In the back of her nightstand drawer, she kept the necklace, the original one. It had survived everything. She never wore it again. But every night she held it in her hand before falling asleep. It was the link, the bridge, the anchor. One Sunday afternoon, Nathaniel took her to a children's hospital. They were building a rehab center, his project, funded not as a donation, but as a legacy. "We're calling it the Clara Hayes Center," he said, pointing to where the sign would soon go. She looked at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because there are kids out there who need to know that someone with your story can walk through these doors and win." She didn't reply. She just rested her head on his shoulder. Anne stayed there. Months passed. Gerald was convicted. The judge, the hospital, and everyone tied to the original scheme were under investigation. For once, justice didn't seem blind. It seemed to be looking. Finally. Then Clara did something unexpected. On Nathaniel's birthday, she gave him an envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter, shaky script, but strong. "Dad, it took me a while to call you that without fear, because for me, Dad meant absence, pain, silence. But you changed that. You looked at me. You listened. You held me when I thought no one else would. Now I know. My place was never that lighthouse. It was here, with you, with Mom, with this house full of pauses and promises. I won't forget what I've lived, but I won't let it define me. I want more, and with you beside me, I know I can be more. Happy birthday, and thank you for coming to find me." With love, Clara. Nathaniel cried as he read it, but not from pain, from peace. That night there was cake, music, new friends, and a clumsy dance between Rose and Nathaniel that made Clara laugh so hard she nearly fell off her chair. But there was one moment that mattered most. Before bed, Clara hung the necklace on her headboard, like a symbol, not of loss, but of return, and she whispered, just loud enough for herself to hear, "Now I know who I am." Outside, the garden was blooming, and the world, finally, seemed small enough to fit in the arms of a family that had chosen to begin again. Thank you for making it this far, but don't go just yet. On the screen beside you is another powerful story. Click subscribe to the channel and share this one with someone who needs to believe in new beginnings. I'll see you there.